Sorry for sorry for bearing with me. Yes, it's 2021. I thought we would never make it, but thank goodness we have arrived. Next slide. So
Hold
in the next,
on, Mike, one sec.
okay,
There.
gotcha. So in the next 30 minutes or so, we will do our last recruitment update ever for Combine, and then really turn our attention towards expectations for the coming year, a bit about queries and data quality and missing or inaccurate data. And then we'll discuss a couple known issues with the registry and database, as well as some workarounds to get us through the next couple months. Next slide. In terms of recruitment, so you all know that we ended recruitment at the end of December with a grand total of 306 randomized patients across 35 different sites. So really, it takes a village or an empire, an amazing amount of work done across the country. And a special shout out to Dayton for randomizing our final patient in December. And as you guys know, this now makes Combine the largest randomized trial in pediatric IBD history. So yay, team. Next slide. This just shows our recruitment over time. And you can clearly see to the right of the slide the flattening of our recruitment curve as we had entered the COVID pandemic in March of last year. And so really our rate of recruitment of 1 or 2 participants a month over the last 6 to 9 months justified our decision to close recruitment in December. We just, with the pandemic and everything else, we're not getting much more participants. And so it's time to turn our attention to follow up and shortly thereafter data analysis. The best we can to answer this question, albeit with fewer patients than we had hoped for. Next slide. This here just shows the recruitment by SNF, and really a special shout out to all of the sites towards the left of this graph, particularly those who recruited double digits worth of patients. Next slide. Keep going. So again, moving forward, next slide.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Mike. Okay.
Yeah, great. So moving forward, we really want to turn our attention to follow-up data capture, data accuracy. As always, continue to schedule patients every 3 months for follow-up. This is sort of standard of care follow-up for high-risk Crohn's disease patients being treated with an anti-TNF, plus or minus our study medication. During these follow-up visits, as always, take a careful history, assess for IBD symptoms. Clinicians can come up with their global assessment, look about adverse events, and assess for whether any of the components of our study outcomes have been met. When possible, follow-up visits should include a physical exam, but we understand that this necessarily can be skipped if we are doing a telemedicine encounter. We expect standard of care blood work, the usual blood counts, liver enzymes, inflammatory markers, and the like. Sometimes this is done in our clinics. Other times we send patients to outside laboratories, whether it be a LabCorp or a Quest or somewhere else. Sometimes these blood tests are happening right around the time of the encounter and can be recorded as part of the clinical visit. Sometimes the blood work is being done several weeks later, and there's a place to enter standard of care blood work as well, if it happens outside of the context of a combined visit. Do your best to enter data in a timely manner. We found with all of the chaos early in the pandemic that many visits were being entered several months later. For sure, better late than never, but really do try to keep on top of data entry. Often it's at the time of data entry that coordinators or providers identify that an outcome was met or that an adverse event was going on, potentially one that would require holding or stopping study medication. We don't want to find out 3 months later that a patient met an outcome 3 months prior. Per protocol, when a patient meets an outcome, we're supposed to stop study medication at that point in time. If we wait 3 months to enter that data and find out that the outcome was met, we've got a protocol violation on our hands. Continue to collect PROs and biosamples when appropriate. We understand that biosamples may be difficult when you don't actually have a patient going to a lab in the clinic with a coordinator present. But PRO collection should be easier now than ever before, as we have multiple methods to do PRO collection: by phone, by fax, by email, through the Qualtrics online format, whatever seems to work best for the site, the coordinator, the patient, the family, we can do and we can accommodate. And again, continue to be vigilant about identifying and reporting when patients meet one or more of those component primary outcomes. This is a pragmatic trial, and we're putting, almost all of our stock in really careful capture of those primary endpoints. If you don't know what I'm talking about when we're talking about the components of the primary outcome, please let us know immediately, and we can do a crash course. Next slide. In terms of follow-up, any patient that was randomized after April 3rd, 2019 will continue to be followed until the study ends, essentially until we run out of time. On April 3rd of 2019 is when we created the new consent form in which patients agreed to be followed for up to 3 years. So how long will patients actually be followed? We are targeting that each participant who hasn't completed follow-up will have their last visit in Q1 of 2022. And so going forward, as we turn the clock and enter 2022, each participant, their very first visit in 2022 will also be their last visit in the combined study. And so we'll go through the process of sort of completion / termination at that time. And then just as a reminder, any patients who were randomized before April 3rd, 2019 still have that optional 3rd year available to them if they have not yet met a study outcome. And so for the next couple of months, we'll continue to reconsent people for the 3rd year of follow-up. But after that April 3rd date goes by, the 3rd year reconsent will no longer be necessary. Next slide. Unblinding requests. So, we've talked about this in the past. We recognize and designed the protocol to provide for clinical unblinding for patients if they are not doing well, and if knowledge of the treatment assignment might impact the clinical care of that patient going forward. Please contact Anne. She can send you the current unblinding form. You'll complete it back to us. We have an unblinding committee of 3 pediatric gastroenterologists, myself, Andrew Grossman in Philadelphia, and Athos Bousparos in Boston, who will review and decide about unblinding. We almost always will approve unblinding requests as long as the requesting physician, the site PI, can clearly explain how care will be changed by knowledge of the treatment assignment. And a lot of times we go back to the PI and say, thanks for this request, but really this unblinding is more for curiosity's sake and is not going to change management. And so we don't want to compromise the integrity of this study. But just this week, we had a super clear unblinding request from a site that is really the example of how to write these. And so next slide. This came from the Lurie Children's site. And I'll just sort of read it quickly. The patient had active inflammation, anemia, elevated inflammatory markers, hypoalbuminemia, and symptoms including fatigue associated with a low infliximab level, despite already changing the infliximab dose to 10 milligrams per kilogram every 4 weeks. The insurance company denied further escalation because that would have been an astronomical dose of infliximab. And so the site PI said, well, you know what, we got to add methotrexate at this point. If the patient is already on study methotrexate, we're going to change them to subcutaneous or shot form at a higher dose. If the patient is on study placebo, then we'll just go ahead and start them on oral methotrexate. And then the doc further said, we already thought about just starting starting the patient on subcutaneous methotrexate, but this particular patient has such a high anxiety with shots that we only want to go to sub-Q form if absolutely necessary. And so a request like this was sort of undeniable and was approved within an hour. Next slide. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Margie, but let me just see if there was anything in the chat box from me. Nothing. All right. Go ahead, Margie.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Well, Mike, at least, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're perfect.
So I'm here just to talk a little bit about the queries you're seeing from me and what to expect over the next few months, just to give you an idea of what we're trying to gather on a regular basis. So weekly, we will check for and query if anything's missing out of.
I'm good. How are you? Good. How can we help you? I have an appointment.
Hold on.
Terry.
Okay. So what we have.
I'm just muting some of the
mute
folks.
that person.
I did. The
Awesome.
folks that are on iPhones can't mute as easily. So if there are any out of range lab results or possible outcomes on a weekly basis, you'll see queries from myself or from Anne. Every 2 weeks, we go through the patient schedule report and see if any patients have not been seen in about 120 days, and we might send a note out to the sites just asking for status on whether they've been scheduled. We also send out every 2 weeks any queries on PI review required when they are outstanding more than 30 days. Once a month, we do a report of all the outstanding exceptions, and any that are older than 30 days, we'll send you a query on. And as always, we really want your feedback on this process. If you think it's too burdensome, if you would like to see everything in a different format, we'd really appreciate knowing that. So please feel free to send Anne or me or Mike an email or give us a call and let us know. And then quarterly, these are longer data queries we do. They tend to be cumulative. So I'll go through all of them very quickly, but if we've already asked you about whether there was a baseline colonoscopy and you've replied to us, no, there wasn't, we're not going to ask you about that again, or we shouldn't be asking you about that again. We keep track of your responses to these things. So the ones that have been in process for a while, like missing labs and colonoscopies, we should only be querying from the point that we queried last, so a few months in the past to the current date. We query colonoscopies and fecal calprotectin results, missing labs, regular labs that would be taken at every visit, concomitant medications with anti-TNF dosing and steroids, ongoing AEs, and combined to ICN matching visits, ICN to combined matching visits. Per protocol, if there is a visit entered in combined, there should be a matching visit entered in ICN and vice versa. So we're keeping track of that, and we'll send you a note if there is a visit on one side and not on the other. The very last one, we are just starting, and so this may take just a little longer for you to review this particular time, but we're checking to see if there are anti-TNF trough and antibody levels in either the ICN record or the combined record. The data is being merged, and then we'll send you a report of what we can see. We only want this for the first anti-TNF a patient is on. So if they go to a secondary or tertiary anti-TNF, we won't ask for data on that. So
just to clarify this a little bit, we're going to look through all sources that we can find, and for each combined participant, we will tell you the dates and values of anti-TNF and trough levels that you all have recorded. And we're just going to say, hey, is there anything else that was done at your site that's missing? And if so, add it to the list.
That's right. And we are just getting this report run for us, but a couple of sites I've sent you as a pilot, the data we have to ask for your help. So thank you for the people who are just looking at the query and trying to give us ideas on how to make it more efficient. And I think that's it. Again, if you have any questions or suggestions about how to make this better, please let us know. We are open to any and all contributions that people want to make.
Okay, this is Anne. It's my turn now. So we are doing, as we've warned you several times already, deep dives into the various data sources that we have, whether we're looking online, whether we're looking through raw data. We are just sifting and cleaning, and we want this to be as complete and clean as possible. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so the missing or inaccurate data is most often discovered when we are preparing the DSMB reports. That happens twice a year, where we have our DSMB meetings in the spring and in the fall. And this year, in preparation, we are going to be running a pre-report so that we can find any missing or wonky looking data and get that corrected before we actually bring it to the DSMB. So some of the things that we commonly find during this is missing race or ethnicity. We might be missing height or weight. And again, some of this is on the ICN side, some of this is on the combined side. Sometimes those sides don't always talk together. So we are hoping that you can help us get this type of data. So also the non-IBD related hospitalizations that haven't been reported. And if you are not reporting adverse events or under-reporting adverse events, that is something that both the DSMB committee is looking at, and also myself and Margie. So we are dealing with kids here, and kids have usually just a whole host of AEs that are usually unrelated to their IBD symptoms. And these are all things that should be reported. So things such as allergies, colds, cough, nasal congestion. In this day and age, we have some COVID AEs that are out there. Anytime you have broken bones, back pain, anxiety. So please always be checking with the patient to see how they're feeling, what they're reporting, how they're doing, and make sure that that gets reported in the database. Super important. Next slide. Other things that we've seen missing is the wait at the screening visit. This most often occurs when the patient is enrolled in Combine prior to being enrolled in the ICN registry. So oftentimes we're not able to define this wait. So we will be going through, finding where we are missing those, and touching base with the sites specifically to see if we might be able to get some of that information. We're also finding that lab values are being reported in a variety of different units. So we want to make sure that we can get all of that on the same page. We can do a lot of that manually ourselves within the SAS program, but we may have to reach out to you to just question if this is accurate or if you have any insights as to what's going on with that. Next slide. Okay, so for this section here, we are starting to accumulate, which is pretty common 5 years into a study, some known issues and how we can go and what some of the workarounds are. So one of the biggest ones that we've been finding is that exceptions are still being triggered on patients who have completed the study or have been withdrawn from the study. Unfortunately, we have not been able to find an easy way to get those removed. So you're going to find those in your queue. The solution is either to ignore those, as long as you know that that patient has completed or early termed, go ahead and ignore them. Or if you like a nice clean queue that says 0 exceptions, you can mark them as no action needed to remove them from your queue. So one of the things that Margie's going to be doing, we've been talking about this, and please suggest other things if you can think about it, is that Margie has been manually pulling out those exceptions from the report that have for patients who have been completed. It was suggested that perhaps we should have within that exceptions email, we can have 2 tables for you. One of the exceptions that we hope that you can clear, and these are on active follow-up patients. And then the second table would be of patients who we know have completed or early termed, and these can be ignored or marked as no action needed. So let us know if this type of information would be helpful if you get both of those, or if it's just going to be too cluttered for your email. Again, just please provide us your feedback for that. Another thing that we've seen been happening is that additional visits for patients that are off study drug ask for a provider sign-off. So even though it's not necessary, we do hope that the PI will review these, but it is not a requirement that the provider needs to do a physical sign-off. So a couple of solutions that you can work around with this is that you can mark the ready for review as false, and then it won't go to the PI. Or you could ignore the pop-up error messages that come up. They sound very troubling when you see them, but don't worry, the data is saved and you can just ignore them if you'd like. And again, the PI, we're hoping, is always reviewing the data, providing the oversight, and identifying any potential study outcomes, AEs, etc. So we're always looking for that. Next slide. Year 3 consents. We've had several sites have issues with this, and so these are for the patients that were enrolled prior to April 3rd, 2019, where we are doing a manual reconsent. You should be prompted at either visit 9 or visit 10 with a pop-up box to upload the consent. If you are clicking on yes, the patient has agreed to continue into year 3. Sometimes that pop-up box is asleep and does not want to wake up. The solution for this is to go in and edit or modify the participant section of the registry, At the very top of that page, you'll see a question asking if the patient wants to continue to year 3. Please select yes and go ahead and upload the consent form. So remember, the pharmacy visits, pharmacy shipments, patients that are on active meds are hard stopped after 8 shipments. So that's 2 years worth of drug. In order to get the year 3 pharmacy shipments restarted, it must have a consent uploaded. That's the only way right now to get those in. So it's really important to make sure that your year 3 consents are uploaded correctly. And if they're not, just give us a shout out and we are more than happy to help you.
I'm on combined.
And then sometimes now in this late date, we're finding that some providers are sometimes locked out, don't have a working password. So contact Margie and she will help facilitate working with the help desk in order to get your password reassigned. Next slide is I'm going to pass this over to Mike and he will help explain this ICN legal ramifications.
Yeah, so in the next minute, hopefully many of you, if not all of you, are aware that Improved Care Now is in the process of transitioning the registry from Cincinnati Children's to a new vendor called Hive. And so if those of you on the call are the ICN team for your site, you should be all over this. If you're not, it's worthwhile to get up with the ICN coordinator or PI and make sure that they are all over this. We hope that the transition will be as smooth as possible for ICN and for Combine. The team that's building the database for ICN and for Combine seems to be first class. There are a number of sort of agreements that your institutions will need to process and sign in order to allow for the data migration. Everything that's signed for ICN will cover Combine. There are no extra steps needed for Combine. We just want to know that you guys on the call have touched base with your ICN teams and that they're working with the universities to process these agreements. Any questions about that, let us know and we can put you in touch with the right people at ICN. We also included the contact information for the ICN team in the newsletter that went out last week. And so I think that officially concludes our meeting. It's 12:01, so we're mostly on time. Ann and Margie and I can stick around if you guys want to stay on and ask us any questions. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next time. And if you want to put things in the chat box rather than speak up, that's fine too.
And thank you, everyone. It was great to see such a large crowd today.
I think everyone has either no questions or has fallen asleep. So I think we can adjourn, but thanks again to everyone who joined.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.